Hello and welcome to the mains PYQ discussion by Nibayes. This is a question from the 2020 mains on rocket architecture. Now, rocket architecture is a factual theme, it's a very basic theme when it comes to art and architecture. But if you see the question setting here, it's about rocket architecture being an important source of knowledge of our early Indian art and history. This is not the first time that UPSC is asking questions like this. Very often we have a factual element and an analytical element in questions, and this is yet another question in the same format. So we have to extract elements of art and history from rocket architecture. Now, when you look at the introduction, we have set it in three areas. First, we'll say that rocket architecture can be traced back to the Ashokan times, which is 2nd century BC. So there is an element of time in it, and we are also saying that rocket architecture goes way back to the Ashokan times. We'll also say that it is an earliest form of architecture. Because if you see architecture, what you see in modern figures is very classified and sophisticated architecture. 10-story, 11-story buildings like the Burj Khalifa. And the earliest element of this architecture can be seen in rocket architecture, where you have a big stone which is carved out into a pillar which has carvings on it. So Ashokan pillar, remember that you have a pillar and you have a lion capital on top of that, and Ashoka used it to deliver his messages. So this is one of the ancient forms of architecture. From this, they started developing rocket temples like the Shiva temple in Ellora cave. Then it became structural temples, and gradually modern architecture began to evolve. So we'll trace it back to Ashokan times. We'll say that it is an earliest form of architecture. We'll also say that it is a very diverse source, starting from inscriptions like this to temples like the Shiva temple. In the body part, we have 6 main points, and each point will extract something in the context of art and history. The first point, it gives insights into the rise and fall of traditions. One example being the Ellora caves. In Ellora caves, you have the Buddhist tradition and the Hindu tradition. So you can see the decline of Buddhism and the rise of Hinduism. In the earliest paintings, there are Buddhism is dominating, you have Jainism as well. Then as time it gets diminished, and Vedic Hinduism began to rise. So this is the first thing, rise and fall of traditions. We'll give this example. Second, insights into philosophy. One classical example is the story of Mara Vijay Nachanda caves. So Mara Vijay is a story where Buddha rises over temptations. Or you take the case of Arjuna's penance. Arjuna's penance is part of the Pallava tradition. It is in Mahabalipuram. Now it is also called as descent of Ganges. It's still a not clearly undisputed sculpture. But in this piece of architecture, what you have is philosophy embedded in it. So it gives us insights into philosophy. Third, nature of cultural syncretism. If you take the Elephanta caves, something related to what we already discussed, it has different traditions in one place. So it shows that Indian subcontinent was a place of cultural syncretism. So that's an insight into our history and as well as our art. The fourth, technical advancements of its time. So fresco is one technique used for painting in Ajanta, and that was the advancement in technology at that point in time. Now we have acrylic paints, and that's the technology of our time. Just like that, during that time it was fresco, and these paintings and this architecture gives us insights into the technology of its times. The fifth point, knowledge of patrons and dynasties. Naturally, every patron has a style. For example, if you take the case of Hoysalas, they had a style called Vesara style. If you take the case of Pallavas, they had rocket temples. It was the Dravidian style. Just like that, every patron and their dynasty has a particular style. So this architecture or the product of their innovation gives us insights about the patrons themselves. One example is Rashtrakutas being the patrons of Ellora caves. Finally, it gives us insights about the aesthetic sensibility of its time. UPC has asked a question in the past about the aesthetic sensibility of Mesolithic rock paintings. Similarly, we can give that point here. The aesthetic sensibility of its time is reflected in this architecture. For example, the Badami caves. Whatever is marked in red here, these are value additions and examples for your answer, and this is the analytical part of the answer. We'll conclude this answer by talking about the transition to structural temples and monuments in the medieval period. So I told you about rock cut architecture in the beginning. Then once time goes by, you have a rock and you have something else kept on top of it, and you have another rock here, then something else comes on top of it. Just like that, it goes on. And these type of temples are called structural temples made of multiple stones. After that, you have big monuments like the Red Fort, Agra Fort, modern temple structures. So the transition begins from the rock cut architecture, and that's what we are going to mark in the conclusion. So that's it. This is the answer. Thank you for listening.